The Gay Agenda, Political Conspiracies, Science or Ideology.
Previously, After the Ball, guiding manifesto for a new brand of pragmatic gay activism. Political conspiracies, efforts to secure gay rights by conspiring with liberal elites within the legal and legislative systems. December 15th, 1973. The American Psychiatric Association decided today that homosexuality is not a mental disorder. It was a political move. The decision was scarcely a cool scientific decision.
Science, in many respects, has been hijacked.
While most LGBT activists acknowledged that the declassification of homosexuality as a mental disorder was a political decision, other LGBT activists claimed that there was scientific research to support the APA's decision. Today, according to the APA website, lesbian, gay, and bisexual orientations are not disorders. Research has found both heterosexual behavior and homosexual behavior are normal aspects of human sexuality. In Singapore, the Health Promotion Board states homosexuality and bisexuality are not mental illnesses. Studies show that sexual orientation has no bearing on mental health or emotional stability. What research is the APA referring to? What studies are the Health Promotion Board referring to? After the 1972 APA Convention, the APA formed a committee to determine whether there was scientific evidence to support their conclusion. We review two prominent studies cited by LGBT activists and leave you to decide if these research are science or pseudoscience. While a pseudoscience is set up to look for evidence that supports its claims, a science is set up to challenge its claims. According to the AGLP, the Association of LGBTQ+ Psychiatrists, influential in the APA's decision were research studies on homosexuality of the 1940s and 1950s. This is Alfred Kinsey, who developed the Kinsey scale in 1948.
Alfred Kinsey's famous 1948 sex survey found that a whopping 37% of all men had had physical contact to the point of orgasm with other men, a finding which seemed to suggest that homosexual acts were too common to be considered a disease.
Life, Look, and Time magazines promoted Kinsey's bold sex findings as heroic scientific truth.
Were Kinsey's findings heroic scientific proof?
The American Statistical Association, much of the writing in the book falls below the level of good scientific writing. They base their claims not on a scientific sampling of normal males, but on a roughly 86% aberrant male population, one that included 200 sexual psychopaths, 1,400 sex offenders, and hundreds each of prisoners, male prostitutes, and promiscuous homosexuals.
Statistician John Tukey said, "A random selection of 3 people would have been better than a group of 300 chosen by Mr. Kinsey." What did Kinsey's science entail?
I looked at table 34 in chapter 5. And children as young as 5 months of age in that table were being masturbated, raped, 24 hours around the clock.
Kinsey's co-researcher, Dr. Paul Gebhardt.
It was illegal, and we knew it was illegal, but it's very important for people to study childhood sexuality. In other cultures, anthropologists can sometimes do this.
Is this science or child abuse? The New York Times, some hail him for liberating the nation from sexual puritanism. Others revile him as a fraud whose junk science legitimized degeneracy. PBS. Alfred Kinsey was an ideological activist with a radical sexual agenda. He conducted deliberately fraudulent research in order to promote this agenda. The Sex Lives of Sex Researchers. A biography of Kinsey concludes that Kinsey's research was driven by inner demons, including homosexuality, masochism, voyeurism, exhibitionism. What are your views on Alfred Kinsey's research? Did you know that Singapore's Health Promotion Board cites the Kinsey scale from Alfred Kinsey's 1948 Sexual Behavior in the Human Male as a source on its FAQs on sexuality? The Kinsey scale suggests that human sexuality exists on a spectrum from heterosexual to homosexual. Health Promotion Board. Studies show that human sexuality is a spectrum ranging from homosexual to heterosexual. Does the Health Promotion Board endorse Alfred Kinsey's research? Let's review another research, psychologist Evelyn Hooker's groundbreaking study.
Evelyn came up with an experiment. She located 30 homosexuals who had never sought therapy in their lives and matched those homosexuals with a group of heterosexuals and then put both groups through a psychological test. The judges were unable to distinguish the homos from the hets. The judges categorized 2/3 of both the homosexuals and the heterosexuals as perfectly well-adjusted, normally functioning human beings.
Based on these findings, Dr. Hooker suggested that homosexuals were as psychologically normal as heterosexuals. This work led the APA to remove homosexuality from the DSM in 1973. Do you agree with the conclusion of this study? One cannot conclude that a mental condition is not disordered because it does not result in maladjustment, distress, or impairment in social functioning. Otherwise, many mental disorders would have to be labeled erroneously as normal. Pedophiles can report not being distressed with their intense sexual interest in children, and they report being able to function in society. Fatally flawed reasoning has served as the basis for rigorous and scientific evidence. This calls into question the credibility of the APA's discussion and identification of sexual disorders. Re-examining Evelyn Hooker, Hooker's study was neither rigorous nor reliable. APA misrepresentations of Hooker over the past 40 years appear to be more in line with ideology than science. What are your views on Evelyn Hooker's research? Ever thought of why Kinsey and Hooker's research only became influential in 1973? Former president of the APA, Dr. Nicholas Cummings.
I made the resolution that being gay was not a mental illness. I also said that the APA, if it passes this resolution, will also vote to continue research, unbiased, open research. It was never done. Political stances seem to override any scientific results.
Should political stances override scientific results in healthcare? Science based on facts. Ideology, a set of ideas. We will now review the ideas of prominent LGBT philosophers. In the 1950s, Simone de Beauvoir, a bisexual French existentialist philosopher.
Just as she'd created the foundations of existentialism, she'd now redefined the limits of gender. Published in 1949, The Second Sex argues that, like our life's meaning, gender is not predestined. As de Beauvoir famously wrote, one is not born, but rather becomes woman.
To de Beauvoir, you are not born a woman, you choose to become a woman, and you are not born a gender, you choose to become your gender. How has de Beauvoir's ideas influenced the LGBT movement?
This is Ari, Gwendolyn and Brynnifer. They are in a polyamorous relationship, and they all parent Hazel and Sparrow. These polyamorous parents let their children choose their gender. And for their oldest child, Hazel, that's neither male nor female. And 2.5-year-old Sparrow has yet to make a choice about their gender.
There aren't only boys and girls.
Oh, so the doctors are wrong sometimes?
Yes, Teddy. Sometimes doctors don't assign the right genders.
Some LGBT activists argue that gender is not limited to male or female. There are moon gender, trigender, or tree gender, like this actor whose preferred pronoun is tree. Are these claims on gender based on science or ideology? Moving on to the 1970s, Michel Foucault, a well-known gay French philosophy historian.
Foucault is the most cited scholar of his generation. He was a particularly powerful purveyor of this idea that science is not what it seems, that it's a nefarious conspiracy.
For Foucault, the belief was that you have these statements, people call them truths. Somebody had the privilege of saying these things are true and other things are false. He saw science as a process of applying power through claims on truth.
Science has been constructed in order to dominate. What you think is science is really the episteme.
What we consider knowledge is what dominant forces in our society have decided is truth.
Truth is not defined by correspondence to a reality, but by a force inherent to discourse.
There is no truth, there is only a battle over words. Whoever wins is the one that gets to determine what the truth is.
While society views science as a means to pursue truth, reality that is supported by facts and evidence, Foucault viewed science as a construction of truth by an invisible dominant force in discourse, the episteme. What are your thoughts on Foucault's ideas of science and truth?
Foucault's death serves as a tragic refutation of his own ideas. In the late 70s, America's gay community was overtaken by a terrible plague. At the time, Foucault was teaching at Berkeley and was an enthusiastic patron of San Francisco's bathhouses, which he continued to frequent even after it was clear they were AIDS incubators. He described these visits as limit experiences, defiant acts against an episteme he said was pushing a dreamed-up disease. By Foucault's logic, AIDS was yet another tool of exclusion, the episteme's enforcement of anti-gay ideology. Foucault contracted AIDS and died in Paris in June of 1984.
After the ball. Fantasyland is where millions of gays live, to believe what feels good rather than what is true. Reality denial is characteristically gay misbehavior. We've seen this pattern of intellectual distortion many times, for many years, in many gays. Was Michel Foucault living in denial of reality? How has his beliefs influenced the LGBT movement?
Nicholas, you teach this, you teach trans studies, so if you would, give us a brief primer on so many gender identities that in your view require non-traditional pronouns.
Basically, it's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex.
No such thing as biological sex. Is this claim based on science or ideology?
The idea that men can be women is fundamentally anti-feminist, it is anti-woman, and it is very politically regressive. Every single person is either female or male, and we should not be afraid to say so.
According to a Safe Space Kit, gender identity, you may identify as girl or boy, a woman or man, or you might identify as agender, genderqueer, non-binary, or just a person. You may choose not to use any specific term to define your gender identity, or you may use a term today that you decide later doesn't fit. Everyone can identify however feels right to them, and our gender identity as our internal sense of self is indisputable. Are these claims based on science, facts, and reality?
It's infinitely changing. It's not tied to any sort of concrete reality, and you can never argue with it. One person can never, ever disagree with it. If you say you're a girl, you are a girl. If you say you're a boy, you're a boy. This is all about assertion.
This person was married for 23 years with 7 kids.
I've gone back to being a child. I have a mommy and daddy, adopted mommy and daddy, who are totally comfortable with me being a little girl.
Should society have to agree that this person is a 6-year-old girl? After the ball, gays reveal several major forms of bad sense. Wishful thinking, believe whatever you like rather than what you ought to know is true. Illogic, gays often decry logic as life-denying, imprisoning and constraining. What it constrains them toward is the unpalatable truth, so it has to go. Emotionalism. Many gays place an exaggerated emphasis on their emotions, valuing them above mere logic, and eventually come to believe that truth is what they feel it to be. Wishful thinking, illogic, emotionalism. Do you agree with the authors? How much of LGBT activism is driven by emotions rather than logic? Moving on to the 1990s, Judith Butler, a lesbian gender theorist who popularized the term gender identity.
In 1990, she released the book that rocketed her to global fame, Gender Trouble.
There's nothing fixed or natural about our gender identity.
Butler openly, proudly, ignores science, writing in Gender Trouble that her critique refuses to search for the origins of gender.
Thanks to Judith Butler, there's no biological substratum that defines gender in any way. We are blank slates at birth. We are inscribed by society's pressures. It's not worth even going into, except that it's absolutely epidemic everywhere.
Even here in Singapore.
In June 2021, Aware posted on their Instagram, there is no definitive way to express gender, and you can't automatically divine someone's gender identity.
Should we have at least one other option on our IC to say another gender apart from male or female?
Such ideas are being taught to children today. Corina Lim in May 2021.
The United Nations and the World Health Organization advocates for countries to provide comprehensive sex education, or what we call CSE.
One of the handouts that concerns me the most is called the Genderbread Person. They teach that gender is a spectrum, that you can choose to be whatever you want. You could be all female one day, and the next day feel like you're neither female or male.
Should children be taught such ideas in schools? Ever thought of who created CSE? A Google search reveals that the comprehensive sexuality education movement can all be traced back to the fraudulent research led by one man, Dr. Alfred Kinsey. This is Esther White, a child participant in Kinsey's research.
When my father came to me and wanted me to do things that he said were secret, I kept them secret. I didn't understand sexuality even at that time. Alfred Kinsey wanted to interview me. This was probably in 1944. In 1947, my dad gave me the pre-published copy of Alfred Kinsey's first book. My dad told me that Alfred Kinsey would change the way the world recognized sexuality. No one ever thought about the fact that people would molest children and call it science.
Parents across the country are pushing back against so-called comprehensive sex ed. Don't let people you wouldn't leave your kid alone with determine how they should be taught about sex.
Are you aware of the goals and content of comprehensive sex education? Did you know, like Alfred Kinsey, Simone de Beauvoir, Michel Foucault, and Judith Butler were all advocates, if not perpetrators, of pedophilia?
In 1943, Simone de Beauvoir was fired for her behavior leading to the corruption of a minor.
Michel Foucault abused boys in Tunisia. Judith Butler in Undoing Gender. It is not necessary to figure parent-child incest as a unilateral impingement on the child by the parent.
You know, it's unfortunate though that the activists that propel our movement in a certain trajectory, insist on giving us this reputation of being anti-woman, anti-children, anti-science and anti-reality. And those are things that a healthy society will always defend.
What kind of society do we want for Singapore? How will LGBT political activism influence Singapore?
Follow us on